Hi, this is Dennis with Second Chance Tackle. Today we're going to take on a wider reels fail project. I got this Penn Captiva in recently, and I happen to be a fan of the Penn Captivas. I like these reels a lot. Customer brought this one in not just because it's missing a little bearing cap here, but because it's very, very sluggish. And as I turn it, the good news is it's turning. The bad news is it's really tight. So that's usually an indication that we have a bent axle shaft, but I'm just not sure. And so I thought before I go just guessing about what parts I may need to order of that, let's go ahead and take it apart. Let's see if we can identify what the problem is here. And if it's correctable, we'll complete the video by servicing this. If it's not correctable, we'll at least show you how to take the reel apart, how the reel is made, and what parts will need to be ordered in order to complete the servicing of this reel. I like this reel. I personally fish a Captiva 6000. It's the first generation. It's the silver one as opposed to this kind of gunmetal color. But I do like that one. I guess if you're into ball bearings, I'm going to guess that at least we have a ball bearing on the handle here. And we'll get started. We'll get started by taking off the external pieces and parts. And this is just trying to understand and diagnose what the issue is at the moment. So as I take off those external parts, I want to thank our first responders and essential personnel, everybody involved in keeping us safe during the pandemic. You know who you are. We know who you are. You're all local hometown heroes. That's our fire and first aid, our police, all of the people in the medical fields, all of the folks that are behind the scenes and things like supply and distribution, and making sure that we have what we need in order to try and maintain our lives as near as normal as we can. All right, so let's test without the spool, see if that makes a difference. No, it doesn't. So it's going to be in the gears. And to get to the gears, we're going to remove the handle. And then you want to check when you're going for removing a side plate, you want to check to see, does the side plate end or does it continue under the rotor? In this case, it looks like there's a separation here, so that the side plate should come off without the rotor being removed first. You can remove the rotor, and why don't we go ahead and do that? So this question just came in the other day. They had a stuck click ratchet on the axle shaft, and they were wondering how come they couldn't get it off. Well, first you have these shims. In this case, we just have the one. That's a spool height adjuster shim. It's plastic. It's very tight on here, so sometimes you can't remove that click ratchet just simply because of the friction on the plastic washer. So that's always a good point to check there. And we're going to go ahead now. We're going to grab a Phillips head screwdriver. And we're going to remove the little hold down screw that goes on here. And then we should be able to remove the handle nut. Take a guess here, I'm usually wrong. It's a 12 millimeter. I'm right this time. And notice as I want to turn this to the left counterclockwise, normally that would remove it, but in this case this is a reverse threaded one, so you're going to remove it by turning it to the right. Once I break its hold, I like to just take it off by hand, and we can remove the rotor and see if there's anything. Well, there you go. So there might not even be a lot of work to be done here, because when we remove the rotor, we just have a ton of line under here broken. So that will certainly slow the performance, the up and down movement. And let's throw this on real quickly and see if that makes a difference. So it's kind of interesting. Sometimes these things are very complicated. I was thinking bent axle shaft, and just removing a little bit of the broken line here makes this thing, well, work like a charm, which is why it's one of my favorite reels. So let's just keep going with the service then. We'll just show you how it's made. We'll tune it up because the owner will be happy that it's able to go fishing again, and I'm kind of happy that we didn't need to go and order any pieces and parts or the like. So we're going to continue here. Here's your answer. The answer is that you had to remove that rotor in order to remove the side case, because there's one more screw up here that's hidden underneath that rotor. All right, we're going to take the bump guard off first. It's called the bump guard because it protects the base case from fracturing. When you slam it into something like a pier rail or a gun wall or something like that, you might break that piece, but you won't break the case or injure it. Good time to tell you to take pictures. I'm taking pictures with a video right now, but if you don't have that video camera, you don't need to take a video. Take it on your cell phone, take it on a digital camera. Heck, use film if you want, doesn't matter, but if you're not using a schematic, kind of flying by the seat of your pants, so to speak, then you might want to take the pictures. That way, if you get disrupted along the way, if you have to order a part, like we had to, the thinking initially was that I was going to have to order a part here. Well, if you need to do that, then you're going to have a reel in pieces and parts, and you may lose where you left the reel as you were kind of doing your problem diagnosis and the like. You'll notice that I'm laying the 4 screws out here on the bench, and I do that to make sure they're all the same size. Now these are all the same size, so I don't have to worry when I go to reinstall, but it's not unusual for a manufacturer to have a different size screw, particularly in the one up here that was hiding under the rotor. All right, the cases come loose already, so let's remove that. We have a bearing and a shim washer sitting under here. That shim washer is used at the factory to properly align the gear. I had a question come in the other day. They said the schematic only shows 1, but there are 2. Well, there's actually, I think there's 2 on this one. The factory presets those based on the play and the manufacturing differences and tolerances on the main gear. So don't be surprised if you open it up and you find more than 1. If you find more than 2, well, that might tell you that you got one that's pretty much out around there, and you might start to worry about that. I'm going to back this all the way down, and that'll enable us to get to the screw that's holding the axle shaft in. This one's covered by old grease, so we're going to make sure we take that off. There's 1 screw that holds us in, so good picture time. Again, you want to notice the orientation of that crosswind block, just so that when you go to put it back in, you know where it goes. Now we'll be able to pull it, and we're also going to test. So my first theory was the axle shaft was bent, because that's what happens. In this case, that axle shaft is moving nice and smoothly, so that's not the problem. The problem was that trapped line. Now we should be able to remove our crosswind block so that it doesn't fall out. And then we should be able to pull the main gear out. Well, the main gear seems to have a little bit of a freeze with that bearing, but that's okay. We've removed the crosswind block. We can remove the gear, crosswind gear. We should be able to. There we go. We've got everything out now. All right. You'll notice I'm wearing a protective glove. You'll also notice I have a parts tray where I keep all my pieces and parts. That's generally off camera. We have a bearing here on the crosswind gear. I'm going to use a piece of paper towel here to clear off the crosswind block. So other than missing a side plate bearing cap, which are generally available, this reel is in good condition. I don't know when that line got trapped, but chances are that that became the reason why the reel needed to repair. And we have a little sticky bearing here. So the first thing you want to do, just check and see if you can lever it off. If you can't, don't worry about it. I think we should be able to get this one off. And you got to pry very gently because you're going against a gear that can break in this main gear. Yeah, so this probably got peened in. I'm not sure what happened to cause the other piece out, but for the purposes of this, I think we're at a point here with this reel where we're just going to clean this up. We're going to leave that bearing intact, and we're not going to disturb it. I didn't notice anything while I was just turning there that said that we have a bad bearing. So sometimes when you get to an older reel, it's just prudent to let the sleeping dog lie, if you will. Of course, if you had a bad burring noise, you would want to take that off, but we're just going to leave that now. And that's just some of the decisions you make. Of course, I'll let the owner know that he's got one that's kind of peened in there. That happens when the handle presses against this. You'll notice that there's a back end collar here on this. It's going to press into this gear. If you over tighten it, you tend to flare the rim of it, and in flaring that, it makes it almost impossible to get that bearing off. So again, if it was more than just what we think it is here with that trap line, of course you would go and order a new main gear, and then you'd probably order the new main bearing too. Alright, so we've cleaned up all the old grease. We're going to go ahead and put new grease on there. So overall, this has got a lot of bearings in it, and they're in the right place, right? There's a anti-reverse clutch above that houses a bearing. There's one on each side of the main gear. That's 3. You got a 4th one here in the housing of the case here for the crosswind block. I'm just going to take that little bit of extra grease there. So this is good news to the owner, and I'm sure he'll be happy to see that he can go fishing again relatively easily. Let's go ahead and take the main bearing out then, and the pinion gear, so we can clean that up. Notice your little anti-reverse override. That's a great place to take a picture. You've got those 2 little blue clips on the back here, and you've got a spring load on the post. So if that gets disrupted as you go ahead and remove this piece, then you know how to reset. This is one of those reels that actually allows you to override the anti-reverse. Many of the Penn reels do not allow you to do that, including the Penn Fierce, Penn Pursuit, and Penn Battles. They all have the one-way clutch with no override. It's another reason why I like the Captiva series. Also look at the orientation here. There's only one way that this is going to go on, but you want to make sure that you're aware that you have the 2 stud holes and then the screw holes behind that. We can remove that. And we should be able to pull the whole assembly up now to get at those bearings. So you notice that we have that collar that's a spring-loaded one. Don't lose the spring. We have a bearing inside here that we're going to oil. Another shim on top of that. Notice when you have the case come off that there's 2 sides to that case if you've taken them off completely, and that you have your little anti-reverse collar. So 2 different sides of the case. That's the downside. Here's your anti-reverse. You don't need to do anything with the anti-reverse. Clean it up, don't grease it. But if there is some dirt and debris in there, get that out of there. And then we want to clean the main pinion gear. That's what this was all about. And again, you can let this one go typically, but we know we had broken line up there, and you want to make sure that you don't have broken line in this assembly. Just because one of those micro pieces may have just fallen, got crunched up a little bit in the pinion gear, and then the next thing you know, you got poor performance going. Alright, so just cleaning out the tracks of this now. It's a good time to tell you, if you like this kind of a video, please subscribe, and if you do subscribe, please hit the notification button, keep it on. That way what will happen is you'll see all of the videos that I post, and you'll be able to figure out which ones you want to see. I work on all kinds of reels. I don't pretend to say that every one of them is going to appeal to everybody, but you may find a reel in there that you like. Saltwater, freshwater, bait casters, spinning reels, all kinds of types of reels if it was made generally and finds its way into my shop. Alright, I'm going to take that now. We know that the next piece up then is the ferrule. That slides over. Then we know that we have our anti-reverse. Get the collar on next. We want to get that bearing which we've oiled into that collar. And we want to get those two shim washers that are on top of that to come on. Remember that little spring there now? We want to load. There's 3 little studs that have to load, and you know that by eyeball you need to get this carrier in. Once that carrier is set, go ahead and hold your finger on that spring so that it doesn't shoot. Grab the little corner or the hole of it that needs to mount to the stud. I generally use a little pick or something to pull it over. And it just takes a little bit of patience, but eventually you will get it. So that's the reset on that spring. Now remember what we said on this. You got the 2 studs, you got the wide side, and you'll notice there's only one way to put it in. If you flipped it the other way, it just wouldn't seat properly. Now we have the 3 of the screws that need to be reattached. No particular order because they are all the same screw. So if you have any questions on this reel or any reel in particular, then leave them in the comment section. In the comment section, you can ask about this reel or any reel in particular. It doesn't need to be this reel. Maybe you're stuck on a particular reassembly or something. And if you are, just leave a question. If I know how to get you unstuck, I'll try my best to do that. But even general questions, maybe like where do you get a part for a reel, or are parts available, or whatever, I will be happy to answer those for you. Okay, so normally you would have a main gear where that bearing came off. It's spinning nicely, but it's just, as I mentioned, it's peened in there. There's no real answer in terms of getting that out. You can't put the crosswind gear in next. Normally you would put the crosswind gear and then you would merge this. You can't do that because of the peening. This when you go to put it in, this gear would be underneath that and it would be trapped. So you can't do that. You got to put this one in first. Go ahead and put it in. We've done that, but keep it high. And then you can go ahead and take this oscillation gear or crosswind gear. This one gets grease on 3 sides. It runs on the back because that's going to ride in the case. It gets grease on the teeth because that's going to intersect with the main gear. That little one in the back there we were showing you gets grease on the face because that's where the oscillating block or the crosswind block is going to ride. Alright, then you can just slide that in like that, and then the whole assembly can be meshed and pulled down. Seated properly. You may need a little assist there. There you go. So we're in. Again, it's not optimal, but what you want to do is you want to do what's prudent. And in this case, since that bearing is riding fine, no sense playing around with that peened up gear. No sense replacing the main gear or the bearing in this one. All right. We're going to take some grease then, and we're going to get that into the back slider on that oscillating gear block, or crosswind block, whatever you want to call that. When you install, make sure that that stud is low. That's the low point of the stroke of this thing. You got to put the one tail under the block here. And then you need to lock in on seating the crosswind block over that stud. Alright, we've got it now. Now if you're remembering how it came out, it goes back in the reverse. Clean up your axle shaft. Just a light coat of grease on that. Anything more than that, it's just going to be pushed out when you come here. Flat side goes down and through the block. So you see the whole line here. And parts tray for the small Phillips head screw that holds that assembly together. Then we can put the shim washers on this, close that case up. There was one on this. And we have the bearing since it just slipped out of the case. Put the case back on. Nice snap, says that everything is square inside there. We have our 4 side plate screws. We noted that they're all the same, so that doesn't matter which ones go where. And as I mentioned, just pay attention when they come on the outside of this, because when you're taking them out, oftentimes that one up top doesn't need a very long screw, so a shorter one is substituted there. And you just want to make sure that when you go to put it back together again, it's in that particular order. 2 more to go here. Folks ask about using a mechanical screwdriver, a battery powered one, to put the screws in, take them out. And I don't recommend that. I've seen cases shattered or warped because of that. There's a lot of high-end torque on the back of those. If you need one, I would tell you just stop it short of the end of the stroke. Leave it proud, and then go in and make the last turn or 2 by hand. That way you can avoid over tightening. All right, so this is back on. Rotor goes next. Somehow I got it hooked on something here. I'll find out where that hook comes from. I think that it's probably laying around from the video I did on the previews. All right, a little bit of oil into the seams. You do not need to oil. You do not need to remove that. Bail adjusters, I've seen them removed all the time. They don't need to be done unless you have a bail problem. We don't know if we had a bail problem here because it was turning so slowly. Guess we'll find out when we do the final test. All right, remember we took it off in a non-traditional right turn. So we're putting it on in the left-hand turn, tighten it down. Look at that, that's a beautiful spin. Wow. Like I said, I like this reel. I don't get hung up with which reels were made in China and which reels were made in the US or wherever they made these reels. Penn also had production in Japan early in the 70s and 80s, other places. I don't typically get hung up on where it's made. I get hung up on the quality of the reel itself, and if it was made to what I would expect the Penn reel to be in terms of quality. All right, we have flat washer goes next. Click washer follows that. Spool shim washer follows that. That all goes down. Bump guard goes on. Now there's a little clip here. Be careful on those little clips. When you go to remove this, you don't want to rip that off. So you have to be careful to make sure it's seated properly on the way in and that you treat it with care on the way out. So that's the wrong side. So you want to bring it over here to that hole. Snap it in then. We have that little gold screw. Match the color of the case bottom there. Put that back in. So I will advise the owner of this beautiful reel that we can order the bearing cap, that the bearing is peened on if it's operational, but it's peened on to the main gear, that I didn't think it was appropriate at this point to go ahead and separate it at the risk of breaking the main gear since it wasn't complaining, but that if he runs into trouble with it, we'll go ahead and get that done. We want to service the main gear before we finish this exercise. I'm going to pull the hex clip off of there. I've got some pretty big washers in here, and they do need service. So the first one up then is kind of a fabric felt washer. I'm going to put dry grease on these. This is not a hard washer. I'm going to use Cal's Universal Grease. I just dip it in the grease, and then I use my gloved hand to work that grease in there to make sure that it's kept nice and fresh. Now the grease doesn't help with the slip or the slide that much. What it really does is help us keep these fresh. You don't want these to dry out on you. That's a recipe for disaster. Alright, that's the first one. And you can see that these have started to dry and have started to work on to bonding with those metal washers. You don't want that. Don't overload it with grease. This is fine, but don't overload, because if you overload, it's just going to squeeze out. And then that squeezing out of that grease is going to result in a fly trap, if you will, for dirt and grease and grime. Alright, last one then. Now I think I've read somewhere along the line that these can be upgraded to HT100 drag washers if needed. These are more like a felt washer, but these seem to be doing fine, so we're just going to leave them as it is. I didn't see any wear there. I'm not sure what species of fish this is going for and how aggressive those fish are and how much you need a drag washer, but these seem to be in fine shape. Alright, that's how you service drags. We're going to go ahead and put this spool back on. Also going to tell the fella to get rid of the line. I've noticed that there is some dirt and dust on here. I don't know when the last time was that this service, since it started acting up. I know we're just at the beginning of the season, so my guess is it's been some time. Probably last year at a minimum, maybe 2 or 3 years, I don't know. But what we will suggest is go ahead and replace it. Line's cheap, and now that you've got a reel that's going to be working again, you don't want to lose that fish, the whole line breaking off. Okay, I'm not even in on the main handle yet, and we're cranking very easily. So let's get this thing set up. There's a little fork that you need to merge. Look at that. That's one of the reasons why this is one of my favorite reels. It just turns nice and easy and smooth. And we'll just check the bail, make sure that there's no problem with the bail. There isn't. So this one's ready to go fishing again. Save for the Pindon burring. Everything is business as usual, and not to worry about burring. So I hope you've enjoyed this. If you did, please like it. If you want to see more, please subscribe. This is Dennis with Second Chance Tackle. Thank you for watching.